Innistrad. It is a realm of nightmares, the horrors of the world tearing at the failing remnants of humanity. However, even in these desperate times, people do have a sanctuary. Welcome to Gavony. The holy city of Thraben rests as Gavony's seat of power, a large city with unyielding walls and zealous defenders. It sits squarely in the center of the province. However, despite the Gyre Reach Mountains, in view of Thraben, Gavony itself is a vast and relatively featureless grassland. Small rocky outcrops and quaint villages occasionally break the monotony of the endless field. This open landscape is divided into 5 separate parishes. Seeing as church and state are the same in Innistrad, parishes can be compared to counties. The 3 parishes whose towns are closest to Gavony are often addressed as one, the Nearhearth region. A land with healthy vineyards and well-fortified villages that rest comfortably within Thraben's area of control. The other 2 parishes hold towns further from the holy city, those being the Moorland parish, a land of foggy rivers and cold, flooded plains. The Moorlands share a rivered border with the Nephilia province, while the Honvir parish, a land to the south, is a fiercely militarized river port. Their silvered blades and wall-mounted crossbows ready for any beast that breaks from the Kessig tree line. While humanity has long claimed these plains as their safe haven, this was not always the case. Long before Edgar Markov began mixing concoctions, long before a church ruled the state, when Innistrad worshipped old and strange gods, humanity barely held on to the sanctuary of Thraben. A tired and weary people fought a losing war against their own dead. Worshippers of demons raised the fallen in necromantic rituals, while the cultists' blood empowered their masters to open new paths to the underworld. Villages burned as cackling imps reveled in the screams, as if they were applause. Demons, meanwhile, directed legions to their new victims, pooling the blood of the sacrificed for the next ritual. The only major city humanity still held was Thraben, a city under siege, with defiant Cathars fighting to the last to protect those cowering in the houses behind the walls. Countless prayers had been uttered in the name of uncaring old ones, as village after village, town after town, each fell silent. Those prayers fell on deaf ears. As madmen, claiming to see the end times, screamed in the streets, the people grew more desperate. Prayers reached for beings they did not worship. Rituals done hoping to gain the favor of unfamiliar gods. Outside Thraben's walls, the demons suppered the desperation like a fine wine. The orders given leisurely, often between the breaking of bones, as they waited for their enthralled witches to finish magical works bound by deceitful contracts those witches could do nothing but obey. Yet the demons could not simply let this despair go to waste, sending wave after wave of their imps and the recently deceased to climb the ramparts. Knowing the Cathar's ranks were growing thin, an unknown Cathar strode the streets of Thraben, leading the people in prayer. A prayer reaching out for anyone, anything, to save them. As the remaining citizens bowed their heads, their faith finally found an answer. Above their heads, 4 figures flew on ivory wings. The pleas of the people had stirred no god, old or new, but instead, their faith, when turned to the unknown, created the beings now before them. The 4 sisters of Innistrad, the 4 archangels, were given birth by the hopes of a doomed race. Just as varied as the people who cried in relief were the sisters themselves. It is true that angels are a concentration of white mana, akin to an elemental, but what hovered before the survivors was a mirror of themselves. When the unknown Cathar asked the sisters for their names, the first to reply was Gisela, her face clearly reflecting the wrath of a hardened warrior as she surveilled the city. The very same anger could be seen in the faces of the Cathars, who were now too wounded to fight. Beside Gisela flew Bruna. She looked to the crowd with the same calculating eyes that the last of the scholars viewed her, her brilliant mind already considering what the city could muster. Next to speak was Singarda. Her expression mirrored the protective fear of the mothers who held their children close. Yet she also showed the same cunning of the woodsmen who prepared traps for when the walls fell. Last of the sisters to reveal her name was Liza, her features showing the same regret that the witches outside were burdened by as they slaved in their work. Yet, her eyes, they were as determined for redemption as those few coven who had managed to slay their debtors. The things the sisters did, and how Thraben survived, are always a different tale, told and retold around rowdy bar tables and quiet forest campfires. Ultimately, the truth has been lost to legend, a legend that the sisters themselves have no intent of correcting. However, while what happened is no longer known, the effects of those fateful days can still be felt across Innistrad. Each of the sisters created angels in their own image, matching their own ideals, forming flights of angels that took on different duties. Bruna and the Flight of Alabaster protected the spirits of humanity, ensuring they reached the afterlife before some dark fate could befall their spirit. Sigaria and her flight of Hurons stand in contrast to Bruna, protecting the living, curing ailments, and warding villages to protect against the night. Gisela and the Flight of Gold Knight take a far more direct approach to protecting humanity, taking the fight to the monsters and training the Cathar for the creatures they will face. While Liza and her Flight of Dusk sought to learn of humanity's enemies, coming to understand their foes, sometimes to defeat them, but ultimately looking for a way to make peace. Deals made with witches, contracts built with demons, all the while studying curses plaguing the werewolves. While Liza did travel a different path than her sisters, they could not deny that her work did make Innistrad safer for humanity. And while Liza could never lose their love, her work did eventually gain her siblings' respect. And so, under the sisters' protective guidance, the survivors of Thraben reached back out across the lands and prospered. The government the sisters formed for these people became simply known as the Church. Through the generations, humanity grew only larger, until the modern provinces of Innistrad were formed. Nephelia, Stetsnia, Gavony, and Kessig. However, the people of Innistrad became too numerous and too spread out for the flights to truly protect. Packs of werewolves grew in number and aggression in Kessig, while vengeful souls and restless dead plagued the lands of Nephelia. The newly made vampires quickly infested Stetsnia. Though vampires had yet to be discovered, the growing disappearances created countless investigations. All the while, demon worshippers, known as the Skirtstag, worked to undermine the church from the shadows of Gavony itself. The flights of angels strove to answer these threats, and yet, with so many humans, people went missing, never to be found. Villages turned to ruins, while guardian angels arrived too late. Faith in the angels wavered. Much like their ancestors before them, those outside the flight's reach began to worship other things, hoping to find their own salvation. As the days reached into the cold months of the year, tremors shook the black mountains of Stetsnia. The ground moved even in nearby lands such as Gavony. It took only a matter of hours to find out why. A large chasm bellowed smoke into the air. The new wound in the earth earned its name of Ashmouth, as the magma within could make the entrance glow red even in the daylight. However, the reason this troubled the angels so deeply became apparent hours later, when demons and their beasts charged from the hellish portals within. Now, with the demons' return, the flights and their faithful Cathars became focused on banishing their ancient enemy, while unbeknownst to them, vampiric infestations ate away at the church from within. Soren Markov, the grandson of the first vampire, finally returned to Innistrad. His eyes were widened by the worlds he learned of during his unintentional interplanar journey. The Stetsnia he returned to had changed in significant yet secretive ways. However, Stetsnia was not the only one, as the church and their flights slowly and steadily lost ground to the multitude of threats to humanity. All the while, vampires fed further inside human lands. For centuries, this imbalance continued. Soren became disturbed by his brethren, watching as the vampires slaughtered humans with disdain, reveling in bloodshed for the sake of decadence and pleasure. Each time he returned from his years-long journeys, vampires became bolder, until their threat slaughtered entire villages in a nightly frenzy. Vampire hunters joined the ranks of the Cathar, eager to find revenge. However, even they were not enough. Soren, after seeing hundreds of worlds, finally acknowledged how unbalanced his home world was. He decided to do something about it. If the imbalance continued unchecked, then vampirism would drive their old kin to extinction. What's worse is that without a reliable source of blood, his brothers would turn on one another to feed. To ensure vampires did not fall upon cannibalism, Soren began work on 2 projects. The first drew on the largest source of silver in Innistrad. Soren locked himself deep within the Markov Manor, delving into magics both forbidden and divine, searching for spells that not even his own world knew of. For years, the only break from the work he took was to answer the need to feed, hunting in the Stetsnian night. With preparation in hand, Soren began the trek into the heart of the human lands. Crossing into Gavony, Soren passed blood-splattered, empty villages. The frenzy of newly made vampires were sloppy and thoughtless. Unlike them, Soren extinguished any survivors he found, only a corpse proving the prey would not become another predator. Upon reaching the towns of Nearhearth, Soren was pleased to see his work already done for him, as a corpse laid outside the hunter's hall, its face bloody from when the vampire hunters tore each fang from its mouth. He took a moment to enjoy the sight, eyeing the stake through its heart, before moving on to the city of Thraben itself. On the night of the full moon, Soren stole into the heart of the city, his footfalls echoing in the stone basement of the largest cathedral in Innistrad, the Church of the Sisters. The very same grounds where those archangels appeared all those centuries ago. Soren worked alone in the silence, etching the grounds with one ritual after another, all of his research forming the symbols now covering the walls. When Soren began channeling the awe-inspiring power of a planeswalker into these rituals, shouts of alarm began to echo upstairs. Cathars and priests alike watched the sky with horror, as a flash of silver rocketed through the sky. Cries of a falling moon reached Soren below, and he smiled, for they were partially right. The ground shook, as at the edge of the courtyard a large, jagged piece of silver impacted, building itself a pedestal out of the ground. One ritual after the next glowed with the vampire's power as a latticework of black mortar crawled onto the surface of the moonstone. His first work completed itself, as fearful onlookers watched the silver's surface turn dark, strange patterns drawing themselves upon its sides. Soren focused more mana than he had handled since the mending, as he pulled together a pool of pure white mana. It began to light the room before him. A swirling maelstrom of mana wrecked the room about him. Yet still, Soren poured more into the creation. Under his careful watch, one feather at a time, a woman began to take shape. Colorless, ivory eyes opened, as an angel looked upon her father for the first time. Her creator gave his daughter the name Avison. When she looked within herself for her purpose in life, as all angels do, she was surprised to find none. When she spoke to her father, he told her her duty was to protect humanity at all costs, to protect the plane of Innistrad from all threats from within and from without. His words became entombed within her very soul. Unbeknownst to them, Soren gave the greatest gift he could to humanity, For within Avacyn, the Angel of Hope, rested a power, the ability to turn faith into mana, enabling the prey of this world to defend themselves in ways they had yet to even imagine. With the work of his greatest creation complete, Soren gave himself a new title as his weakened form made the long trek home. Soren, the Lord of Innistrad. Oh, if only the world knew how true it was.